Well, I'm tremendously excited to be here. I'm tremendously excited about Initiative 2. Initiative 2, not if, but when it wins, is going to bring the third largest state in America and the first state south of the Mason-Dixon line firmly into the medical cannabis camp. More importantly, Initiative 2 is going to bring this essential medicine to 20 million more Americans. Many of them are grandparents, our grandfathers, our grandmothers, who are currently being fed a stew of poisonous and mostly ineffective pharmaceuticals. Our veterans coming back from war with PTSD and traumatic injuries, and the hundreds, maybe thousands of kids who are still suffering dozens of grand mal seizures every day that they do not need to be suffering simply because their parents cannot get the medicine that they need to make them well. All of these things will change with the passage of Initiative 2. I'm tremendously excited to be here. I've never been in a state so far ahead of the passage of an initiative where so many people had so much interest in talking about it and in learning about it. I commend all of you for being way, way ahead of the curve and coming out.
Colorado has gone through phases where they had to do vertical integration, where the grow side of the dispensaries were forced to come together, and there are all sorts of issues with that. My first question is, if you could choose a way to have it, what would you choose for Florida to be? What sort of model, and what are some of the reasons behind that? And then the second question, also what's happening with grow sites in Connecticut and Illinois and other places, they're so massive, right? It's turning into just a real big warehouse operation. What do you think might be the potential impacts of that compared to where the grassroots are for the industry?
Great questions. So there's a lot of issues that are going to come up in the regulatory process, and there's different ways to go. One of the major issues that's going to come up is, what does the supply chain for cannabis look like? Where does it come from? Where does it go to? What channels does it move through until it gets to the ultimate consumer? Law enforcement, in the mistaken belief that it's the best way to avoid diversion, has urged in many places a vertically integrated seed-to-sale system, where the same organization handles the plant from the time it goes into the ground until the time it reaches the final consumer. In my opinion, that is the wrong way to go. Number one, because it doesn't work. The surest way to make sure that there's going to be diversion is to put every single step of the supply chain in the hand of one organization who's in charge of accounting for all of it. There's many, many opportunities for mischief there, all the way at every stage of the game. More importantly, or equally importantly, I think, a vertically integrated model is going to close a lot of people out of the business. It's going to require pretty massive capitalization for anybody to get in. And it's going to retard the development of our industry. It's going to do that because if you have to go broad, you can't go deep. If you have to handle every single step of this plant from the time it goes into the ground until the time it reaches the final consumer, you're not going to be able to do any one of those steps very effectively, much less the degree of innovation that this industry calls for today. This plant's been illegal for 75 years. We have a lot of catch-up work to do. So the regulatory models that get implemented should reflect that. Instead of a vertically integrated model, I advocate for a segmented supply chain where different parts of the supply chain are separately licensed. So growers are licensed to grow, and transporters are licensed to transport, and wholesalers are licensed to wholesale, and retailers are licensed to retail, just like every other American business. Seems evident. As to the method of production and cultivation, this has been another real challenge in many states, and regulators, often led by law enforcement, take the position that the only way to secure a cannabis crop is to grow it in a warehouse and to surround it with ridiculous amount of cameras and fences and security, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's a big, big, big problem with that for all of us, right? And that's that it takes 200 pounds of coal to produce the electricity needed to grow 1 pound of cannabis indoors. You can drive 23 miles down the average American highway in an American car with the same amount of electricity, energy that it takes to produce 1 joint of cannabis. Think about that the next time you're smoking a joint of lamp-grown indoor cannabis. There's no reason for it. The reason that we moved cannabis production indoors in the first place in this country because the federal government terrorized us into doing it. And if they will back off, we will take it back out into the sun where it belongs. And we will provide a new crop for our farmers. And we will provide a new crop for families. We'll give them a way to stay on this land. And the regulatory model that gets implemented should be open to the widest number of people. It should be a segmented supply chain. And it should operate like every other American business. Let's produce cannabis out in the sun where you can grow it. Think about it, tomatoes. What tomato do you want to eat? You want to eat a tomato that's grown under a lamp in a chemical stew? Or you want to eat a tomato that's grown in organic soil underneath the sun with the loving human hands on it? Same thing with cannabis. So I would say that especially in Florida, where there's such a crisis in agriculture today, where the climate, I believe, ultimately will be able to produce both high-quality medical cannabis and an abundant amount of industrial hemp. In Florida especially, we need to make sure that sun-grown cannabis has a place in the regulatory system. Any other questions?
Anyone, just raise your hand.
I can talk about this stuff forever. Okay.
Hi, Lauren Johnson, Fox 35 News. My question, is there anything in Florida that will make it unique to make it easier or more difficult to change the perception of marijuana to get this vote to happen in November?
Yeah, I think that in every state, in every new state where medical cannabis is being introduced to people who don't really know it or don't understand it, the surest way to win people over is to let the patients speak. They will tell their stories in a more compelling way than any second or third party can possibly do it. You want to pick those patients carefully. You want them to represent very sympathetic groups. I believe that one of the reasons that we saw the passage of 1030 and similar bills in places like Utah and Alabama is because so many parents have risen up over the course of the last 6 months and demanded that they be able to have some way of treating their children who are desperately ill, who are possibly dying without that medicine. So parents and children, very effective representatives, very effective stories. In Florida especially, we have a huge senior community. If you take a list and you look at the list of major senior wellness complaints, and you take a look at the list of things that cannabis is efficacious for, it's basically the same list. I mean, I went and I visited, my mom's dealing with some dementia, and so pretty committed to keeping her at home forever and ever. But I went and I took a look at some of the options that were out there, and I've actually had occasion to visit a number of other senior centers, but on this particular one occasion, I went into the dining room, and it was the saddest sight maybe I've ever seen in my life. There were 30 or 40 folks sitting around tables, nice room, nice plates, decent food. None of them could talk to each other. None of them could talk to each other. They were all shuffling and nodding so badly from all of the medication that they've been doped up with that they couldn't even connect with each other. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. So let's get our seniors out in front of the cameras. Let's get our seniors out to be representatives. They, again, can tell their stories more effectively than any of us. And let's not forget also our veterans. We're losing huge numbers of vets to PTSD. Well, you know, there's some things that people are supposed to forget. And sometimes they have a hard time doing it. And cannabis seems to help. way better than anything else. So let the veterans get out front and tell their stories. Let our patients, like Kathy, who's been incredibly effective advocate for years and years all across the country, tell their stories. That's what's going to move the debate.
I have a question, Greg Allen with NPR. You talked about this idea of segmented market. Have you seen states that have done it right that would be good models for Florida in terms of the economic rollout here?
Who have utilized a segmented supply chain?
Right.
Yeah, that's the system that they've adopted in the state of Washington, where they're licensing cultivators, they're licensing processors, and they're licensing retailers. And they're actually forbidding a single organization to control all three of those organizations because they have understood correctly that vertical integration is the surest path to diversion to the illegal market.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, one more.
What's your response to critics who might say that legalizing medical marijuana muddies the waters or opens doors for other things to happen?
Well, you know, I believe that cannabis has been a medicine for 10,000 years. It's been used as a medicine by human beings long, long before we had any formal systems of medicine. It's never killed anybody. If you take a look at aspirin, say, in this country, you find that about 3,000 people a year die from the improper use of aspirin. But anybody can walk into a pharmacy and buy as much aspirin as they want, and they don't even really get a significant warning about the possible downsides. So I think we need to have standards that are uniform. If we as a society are going to allow people to walk into a pharmacy and purchase something that kills 3,000 people a year, and I don't see any reason that adults shouldn't be able to walk into a dispensary and purchase the medicine that they need with or without a doctor's recommendation at the end of the day. Does that muddy the waters? I don't think so. I think that what we've seen is that there's a process of education. As Sanjay Gupta recently observed, the American people have been systematically lied to for the past 75 years about cannabis. It is no wonder that they're confused. It's no wonder that they're confused. With medical cannabis, what we found is that we introduce cannabis to people who maybe have never thought of it as anything other than an intoxicant, as anything other than a threat. Once they see the way that we handle it, once they hear the stories of our patients, once they see what a legitimate and well-regulated cannabis market looks like on the medical side, very often the stereotypes that they've been holding, the lies that they've been told begin to dissolve. And they begin to open themselves to the true facts of cannabis. And that rather naturally leads them to the conclusion that this is something that adult Americans should be able to make their own mind up about. I think that's really the process. It's a process of education rather than a process of muddying the waters.
If there's no more questions, we can keep it on moving.
All right, I'm just going to keep on moving. I want to really thank Tom and Pete. I know that there were also a lot of other people who worked to put this event together, because there always are. It takes way more work than anybody who's never put on an event could possibly imagine. So let's give them all a really big hand for bringing us here together today. So yeah, I've already told you that I'm excited to be here, and of course the main reason that I'm excited is because bringing this medicine and bringing this truth to people has been my passion for 40 years. And the prospect of having 20 million more Americans finally be able to receive it is hugely exciting to me. The fact that we'll be able to help our vets, to help our kids, all of that is hugely exciting. It's the most important part of this story, as Tom observed. But this is a cannabis business conference. So let's talk about some of the other things that Initiative 2 will do. If we're lucky, and the regulatory process goes right, and the rulemaking process goes right, Initiative 2 is also going to establish a professional, responsible, and hopefully profitable cannabis industry in the state of Florida. And what I've seen across the country is that that industry has already become the single most potent force that we have to dismantle cannabis prohibition. And all of you in this room today, you are the earliest pioneers of legal cannabis in Florida. You are the ones who are going to build that professional, responsible, and profitable industry. You are the ones who are going to create the investment opportunities. You are the ones who are going to create the jobs. You are the ones who are going to disempower the cartels and the gangs. And even when you're competing with each other, you will be each other's best friends and allies. The reason for that is that we're all getting in on the ground floor of something that's going to be very, very big. And the great thing about getting in on the ground floor of something huge is that there's lots of opportunities. And there's going to be for some time. There's going to be for some time. And I promise you that 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, if we all work hard, if we're willing to put our money where our hearts is, if we're willing to take some risks, if we persist with the challenges and the setbacks that will inevitably come, we will be able to get back together one day and we'll be able to congratulate ourselves. We'll be able to pat ourselves on the back and we'll be able to count our treasure together. I promise. We'll do it together. So be kind and be gentle with each other. You are the earliest pioneers. Collaborate with each other when you can. If you can't, then compete fairly with each other. And never, ever, ever say anything ill about your fellow pioneers. Not to anybody, not in public and not in private. You know, passing 2 is just going to be the beginning. Getting it implemented is going to be a whole nother struggle. And the know-nothing, anti-science, head-in-the-sand crowd that's opposing 2 is going to be hurling invective at us for years to come. Get ready, and don't ever give them a hand. Remember our real competitors haven't even showed up on the scene yet. When we've taken 20 or 30% of the market share of the alcohol industry, and 30 or 40 or 50% of the market share of the pharmaceutical industry, when we measure our annual sales in tens of billions of dollars and then hundreds of billions of dollars, federal law will change. And when that law changes, big players are going to come onto the scene. And they're going to have massive resources and far-reaching abilities. And their presence is going to bring both opportunity and challenge for those in the room today. We have a window of opportunity. We have a short time to establish our brands, to establish our businesses, to set the course before that happens. But as we're looking at this thing that we're building, let's not close our eyes to really what I think is the greatest opportunity that we have in front of us. And that is to create a new industry, a whole new industry from the ground up, to establish its culture, to establish its standards, to establish its priorities, its trade organizations, its policies, everything about it. Let's make sure that that's something that we can be really proud of. Let's make sure that when we look back, we come to that day, that we're able to say, not that we just built a new kind of new industry, but we built a new kind of industry. Let's make sure that we're able to say, not that we just treated our workers and employees fairly. Let's make sure that we're able to say we treated them generously. Let's not just be able to say that we didn't bring any harms to our communities. Let's make sure that we can point to manifold and many benefits that we've brought. Let's make sure that we aren't just compliant with environmental regulations, Let's make sure our companies become the most energetic advocates for a sustainable economy and a healthy planet. Let's make sure that we set a gold standard for other industries and other businesses all around the world to emulate. We can do that. We can do all of this. We can build wealth and we can achieve all of these goals at the same time if we stay true to our better selves. And if we do that, we're really going to be able to claim the greatest reward of all, which is being able to say that we left this world a little bit better place than we found it. Okay, so now we know where we're headed. I've counted all of our eggs before they've hatched and promised you wealth and riches and a happy ending. Let's talk about how we get there. If I'm getting like within 5 or 10 minutes of my time and I'm not very far through this, will somebody sort of give me a signal? Okay. Am I doing this wrong?
Just give us 1 second.
Okay, I think we're replacing the device. Are we replacing the device?
You could just roll into it. Just having a few technical difficulties.
No, this is not working. This is not working. Dan, if you want to bring me the printed copy of this presentation, I can get started from the printed copy while the technical problems get worked out. Okay? So what I'm getting ready to tell you about is my top 10 secrets, not really secrets, top 10 tips to being successful in the cannabis industry. And it's a rather long list, so hopefully it's going to be presented to me here. And number 1, though, I can tell you on the list of top 10 tips is to be always squeaky clean in everything that you do. Don't just be compliant with whatever the laws or the regulations are. Bend way over backwards to make sure that nobody can even color your actions vaguely as being anything other than 100% responsible and professional. I'll tell you a story. One of the earliest infused products companies that came on the scene in the Bay Area in California were operating completely legally according to California state law, not doing anything that would impact them from a criminal point of view. But they had a great idea that put them in violation of trademark laws, and they thought it would be cool to make up a bunch of candies that looked like Reese's Stoner Cups or Cashy Bars, and were pretty good replicas of the real thing. Now, their intention wasn't to market to kids. They were actually really just marketing to dispensaries where kids couldn't get it. But the perception was deadly, and the consequences of what they were doing were horrible. Of course, little Johnny wandered up to the kitchen table and found one of these packages a few different times, ate the candy, and ended up in the emergency room. Well, Tainted, which was the name of the company, was one of the very first victims of federal prosecution in California. And that's a rather extreme example of what I'm talking about. Let me give you a more realistic example. In California, we are required to operate on a nonprofit basis. There's no state authority that examines whether or not we are in fact doing so. We're just required to do so. In fact, many of the dispensaries in California arguably are not operating on a nonprofit basis. I wanted to make sure that nobody could ever accuse Harborside of that. And so before we set our salaries, we hired an independent compensation expert with experience in the nonprofit sector to come in and take a look at our job positions and our job descriptions, to look at the qualifications and the experience of the people that we were going to be putting into those positions, and to give us a range of acceptable salary levels from low to medium to high. And we made sure, absolutely, that we were always in the low to medium range. So nobody can ever accuse us of that. It's particularly important these days when the federal government has issued a very explicit list of things that will trigger federal prosecutions. One of them is saying you're a nonprofit, not really operating on a nonprofit basis. So being squeaky clean, going overboard to make sure that you always appear to be squeaky clean is really critically important. Danny, do I have a... Okay, all right. So I don't know if this is in the right order, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is wellness and cannabis. And I'm going to urge you that when you put your businesses together, when you put together retail stores, when you put together their look and feel, when you put together packages from your products, when you put together your advertising, when you put together your publicity, present cannabis as a wellness product and not as an intoxicant. And let me give you a little story that will sort of illustrate what I mean by that. And this is a story that's sort of made up of a lot of many incidents that I've had over the course of the years. Somebody comes up to me and says, Steve, I so support what you're doing. Thank you for all your work. You know, I think it's really, really important that people who need this cannabis for medicine can get it. And, you know, I've been using it myself for 30 years, you know, but I'm not sick or anything. You know, I just like to get high. I'm like, okay, let's talk about this a little bit. Tell me how you use cannabis, when you use it, and what it does for you. Why do you use it? And I'll get an answer something like this. Well, you know, normally without cannabis, I'd be coming home from work, be kind of pissed off because I had a fight with the boss. I'm anxious because I didn't quite get all the work done. I'm sitting in rush hour traffic and I'm breathing fumes. I'm irritable. I'm kind of depressed. I don't have a lot of patience. I get home. I don't really feel like playing with the kids, much less telling my wife what I did all day. My stomach is sour. I don't have an appetite. If I eat something, I'm not even really going to be able to digest it very well. And when I try to get close with my wife, it's really hard. You can't really connect. And my sleep is fitful and disturbed. I'll sleep for a few hours, but I'll wake up and not be really rested. But if I use cannabis, I come home. I'm not anxious. I'm not depressed. My stomach feels pretty good. It's got a bit of an appetite. I'm thrilled to see my kids. I'm happy to sit down and play trains with them. Nothing could be groovier. I have a really nice conversation with my wife and connect. Not only do I tell her what I did, but I remember to ask her how her day was. Sit down and I have my meal. I digest it really well. We put the kids to bed. We have some extra special intimate time together. Then I go to sleep. I wake up in the morning. I'm refreshed. I'm not tired. I'm not hungover. Everything's great. I go to work and have another great day. But I'm not sick, you know. I'm not a patient. There's nothing wrong with me. Well, you know, we see how many advertisements every night on television that are going to be advertising pharmaceutical drugs for depression, for anxiety, for insomnia, for an upset stomach, for all the things that many people have told me similar stories, thinks that they are getting high on. Actually, millions and millions and millions of pharmaceutical prescriptions are given for every single year. And those folks, if you talk to them, and I talk to lots of people about their pharmaceutical use, I have yet to find very many of them that are happy with the effects that they're getting, that are happy with the side effects that they're suffering through, that are happy with the prices that they're paying. And so I think that cannabis holds real alternative for a wide range of wellness issues. But I define wellness very, very broadly. It includes cancer, it includes epilepsy, it includes all of the grave illnesses that we know cannabis is not only palliative for, but that it's curative for. But wellness also includes things like insomnia, things like anxiety, things like depression. But then there's a whole range of overlooked wellness benefits of cannabis. Right? The ability to extend your patience, the ability to spark your creativity, the ability to enhance your libido, the ability to make a meal more interesting, or a piece of music more engaging, or to open you up to a more intense spiritual experience. These are all legitimate wellness uses of cannabis. These are all talking about things that enhance and bring value to the things in your life that you already care about. It is not about getting intoxicated. It is not about getting out of it. It is not about escaping. It is not about getting high. It is about being well. So I'll urge you. Thank you. And that plays out in all sorts of different ways. Do we ever get? No. Okay. Danny, do we have the paper version?
We're
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit also. I don't know if we're in the right order or not. We have to flip around when we finally get the PowerPoint up here. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the media and about publicity. Because you will have a really unique opportunity, especially in the first few years that this industry starts developing. You will be the story. You will be able to reap hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of earned media exposure if you do it right. If you do it wrong, you could end up having your reputation completely trashed. So you need to be careful, but there's huge potential here to introduce yourself to the public, to establish your brand in a way that we may never be written about and talked about as much again as we're going to be over the course of the next few years. So one of the very best pieces of advice that I can give you is prepare for that exposure. Understand that whether you seek it or not, you may very well find yourself under the spotlight just because that you're involved in the industry. Little things that you probably haven't given thought to in years, like the fight you had with the neighbors or the Jerry Garcia bumper sticker on your car, all of a sudden could be twisted to make you look like somebody that you're not. So take a look at your entire life. Take a look at the car you drive, at the clothes you wear, at the words that you use, at your associations, and imagine them through the worst and most negative light possible. And then clean it up, clean it up, clean it up, clean up your act and be ready, because the spotlight will be coming. If you're ready for it, and the best way to be ready for it is to have a story to tell. Have a compelling and a unique story to tell. And be able to tell that story very short and very succinctly. My best advice to people who are going into media interviews is figure out the most important thing that you have to say in about 7 words, no more than 10, because you're not going to get more than that in a soundbite. So make sure that you know what it is, what your absolute most important point is, and then get that point down to the most brief and succinct telling possible.
Steve, you're all set.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so let's see. Let me go backwards and see what I skipped. Okay. No, we're going to be clean. We're going to treat cannabis as a wellness product. We're going to build a strong base of support. So critically important here, this is a controversial product. It's going to be controversial for a long time. It's critically important that you reach out to the community. At Harborside, we participate in just about every civic action program you can imagine. National Night Out, Adopt a Spot, Little League, National the Coat and Warm Blanket Drive. We've won awards 4 years running for collecting the largest amount of food during the annual food drive in Alameda County. All of these things are critically important because the folks that you help, they will be your best allies. They will come forward. You will be able to call on them when you're under attack, and you will be under attack. Make no mistake about it. It will come. Our opponents aren't going to give up after we pass the law. But having a senior advocacy group, having a community service organization, having a disabled support service, organization on your side willing to stand up in public is hugely valuable. Know and support your elected representatives. Going to their events, giving them campaign donations, understanding what their concerns are, is really important. Do your best to become a trusted messenger on the topic and on the issue. Politicians are always looking for people who can bring them good information, people that they can trust, and people that bring them campaign donations. Build alliances with all your other stakeholders. This just goes back to what I said in my opening remarks. Reach out to each other. There's so much opportunity here. You'll better be able to build it together than you will fighting each other. Invite media attention. We've already talked about that. The regulatory model, really critically important, especially at this stage of the game in Florida. What those rules end up looking like is going to determine what the industry looks like and is going to determine where the opportunities are going to lie within that industry. And I'll give you a few examples of how that plays out. One is the patient to dispensary ratio. One of the most critical decisions that regulators will have to make is the number of retail outlets to license. And different states have done it in very different ways. In Massachusetts, which has population roughly the same as Washington State, they're licensing an initial 20 dispensaries statewide. In Washington State, which of course is adult use and therefore a bit larger market, but not much because the Massachusetts law is very encompassing, there are going to be 350 retail outlets that are going to be licensed. Well, that means if you're looking to be a retailer in this industry and you're in Massachusetts, that your capital requirements are going to be many, many multiple higher than they would be in the state of Washington. You're going to have a much larger team. You're going to have much more sophisticated talent. You're going to have more effective government relations in order to get through that regulatory process in the first place. I think that there's upsides and downsides to almost every regulatory system. The important thing is to be really aware of it and the impact that it's going to have on your business. If there's only 20 or 30 retailers, what does that mean if you're going to be producing products? What does that mean if you're going to be cultivating cannabis? What does that mean to you? Look at the downstream implications. Another really important issue is license allocation. How are licenses allocated for cannabis businesses? Well, different states have done it in different ways. Some of them, like Arizona and Washington, just pulled out the same ping pong balls that they used for the state lottery and gave them a spin and pulled out a ball. If you ask me, you know, that has a huge risk attached to it that you're going to end up giving one of those balls to somebody that's not going to make our industry look very well. So I have some concerns about that. In other places, there's been a merit-based system where each applicant is required to submit an application that has different sections. They're scored on the sections, and the applicants who can demonstrate they're going to do the best job, that they have the most resources, that they have the greatest degree of community support, are granted the licenses. In other places, folks have taken a zoning approach, like in Colorado, where they simply said, if you will abide by the following requirements, we will allow you to open wherever you want to. Yeah, some problems associated with that too. In Denver at one time, there were 1,000 dispensaries in the city, 1,000 in the city of Denver. 2 years later, there were 250. And the price of cannabis had dropped by 50% in that same 2-year period. Huge amount of suffering that happened because of that. A lot of people who bet the farm or their kids' college education on cannabis because it was a sure thing ended up losing quite significantly. So it's really important that you understand the license allocation and pay attention to taxes. Huge variation in the way different states approach taxes. In Washington State, there's a tax burden of 25% at each stage of the supply chain. 25% when you transfer from the grower to the retailer, or grower to the processor, 25% from the processor to the retailer, and 25% from the retailer to the customer. In my opinion, that raises the possibility that they will not be able to effectively compete with the illegal market and may completely defeat the purpose of the adult use initiative in the first place. In any case, it will certainly make it much more difficult for the businesses that are going to open to claim market share from the underground market, and their growth is going to be slower. So very important that you look at all of these details of the regulatory scheme, follow them out, and understand how they're going to impact your particular business model. Another really important decision that regulators will make, as I talked about earlier, is whether or not you're going to be able to grow sun-grown cannabis or not. And if you can, then it will be much less expensive and much easier for a lot of folks to become cannabis farmers. I think it'll lead to a more robust industry. But there's a lot of folks who are fans of putting up a lot of warehouses too. That's happening all over the country. So like Tom said, make sure that you listen to folks other than I have some very definite opinions on all of these things. And finally, influence those rules. I say influence if you can, adapt when you can't. You can influence. You can, and you should, and you must. If you haven't read the initiative thoroughly, read it thoroughly. If you don't know which legislators are going to be working on the rulemaking process or which department people are working on, find out who those people are and develop relationships with them. Start telling them what you think is going to be the best regulatory model in this state. You can influence it. They know nothing. They know nothing about cannabis. This just landed in their laps, and they're going, marijuana? Me? I don't know anything. How am I going to start? What am I going to do? Well, if we're not there to give them their information, if we're not there to give them good information, if we don't become their trusted sources of information, the cops are going to be right there giving them bad information. They'll be there anyhow. So we have to offset that. Absolutely. Now start to influence it, because the opportunities that will be available to you are going to be perhaps more profoundly affected by what those rules look like than any other single factor that you're ever going to have to deal with. Be audacious, be aggressive. This thing is growing so fast, and it's growing so massively. We are already the fastest growing industry in the United States of America, and soon will be one of the largest industries in the world. There's way more opportunities out there than any person or any organization, even a large organization, can possibly exploit. So be focused. Think about which opportunity is the one that you want to take on first. Prioritize them, select them, be careful, be focused. I've seen a lot of people come into the industry and they become so excited about the range of opportunities that's open to them. They get so excited about the rapid growth that they see that they start being more like a shotgun, right? Wow, there's an opportunity. Bang, there's another one. Bang, there's another one. Bang, bang. I'm going to urge you all to be a little bit more like rifles than shotguns, and really aim well, think about what your target is, and execute. The opportunities, the other opportunities, they're going to keep on coming. This thing's going to be growing for the rest of all of our careers. So you don't have to do it all at once. What you do need to do is make sure that you do it right, and you build a record of success that will lead you to your other opportunities. Similarly, plan for rapid growth. That means making your business replicable and scalable. Don't build a business that depends on 2 or 3 people, particular individuals, in order to make it run. Make it replicable. Develop formulas. Brand your products. Brand your businesses. Make those brands mean something. And get ready, because your growth, if you do it right, your growth is very soon going to rapidly outstrip the financial resources that you have to support it. And you have to prepare from the beginning your investor strategy. Companies that prepare an effective investment strategy before they even start are far more successful in raising the investment money that they need and raising it on terms that allow them to actually keep control of their company after it becomes successful. Don't start looking for money when you need it. Start that process long before you need it. I promise you, if you do your jobs right, if you follow all these other tips, you will need investment money. You will. And then come to the ArcView group, okay? Innovate, 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 innovate. And when you innovate and when you invent something, protect it, okay? 75 years, this plant's been illegal, right? What's happened in that time? We've seen the creation of modern business. I mean, there's hardly had typewriters then, much less computers, much less the internet, much less everything that we have now. I've got a machine in Harborside that will instantly give me the cannabinoid profile of any sample of cannabis that I put in it. Amazing stuff, right? Amazing stuff is happening. And you will be forced, in the course of building your businesses, you will be forced to innovate, just like I was forced to innovate. I didn't want to open Harborside and sell medicine to people that wasn't tested, that I didn't know exactly what was in it. And I had to, because when I called all the testing laboratories in the Bay Area, they all said, "What, are you crazy? There's this little thing called federal law. We're not going to touch it." And so it was up to me, it was up to us to go out, to find the funds, to find the scientists, to identify the equipment, and to put together the first testing lab. You will have similar experiences. You are going to run up against walls and you're going to find, I need this, and it doesn't exist. And the most creative and energetic among you are going to say, well, guess what? I'm going to invent it. I'm going to be the first. I'm going to do it. If that's the kind of person you are, start looking now for a good intellectual property attorney. Reach out and form that relationship. Educate yourself about copyright law, about trademark law, and about patent law. Know these things before you build your businesses, because the knowledge that you gain will very greatly influence the business decisions that you make. If you don't have that kind of relationship with a good IP attorney, you're going to be making a whole lot of other people very rich off of your ideas. So make sure that you protect what you create. Support the movement, okay? Without this movement, without the movement that's gone on really now, I've been a part of for 40 years, to tell the truth about cannabis to the American people, we would not be in this room today. We wouldn't be looking at the opportunities. We certainly wouldn't be the fastest growing industry in the United States of America. It is the movement that opens markets for us. We don't open markets like most industries open markets. We open markets by passing laws. And the only way we pass those laws is if we have effective and well-funded movement. So one of the reasons that I say that, and I've found, that a professional, responsible, and profitable cannabis industry is the most potent force that we have to dismantle prohibition is because we're going to generate the money to do that. We're the ones who can do it. We're the ones who have a vested financial interest in seeing that change happen. So dig deep. I mean, dig deep until it hurts, until you go, geez, I just can't give anymore, okay? Because that's what's going to open new markets. And even beyond that, that's what's going to protect your existing brands. Believe me when I say that the people who are opposing too are not going to stop opposing our industry just because we win. They will continue to go through the rulemaking process, to do everything that they possibly can to delay, to stop, to distort, to suppress. And without effective advocates, without patients going up to the Capitol, without politicians constantly being contacted, without favorable media being paid to us, we can lose what we've gained, much less not being able to open new markets. Beyond that, those critical life and death issues, it's a great way to publicize your brand. And we have something that other industries don't have, which is a pre-existing social network of millions and millions of cannabis aficionados across the country. And they are linked together by a whole variety of channels of communications, through magazines, through blogs, through websites, through events. There are just all sorts of connections there, and word will spread through that community pretty quickly. The activist community is in touch with almost all of that community. So support them, access their networks. You will be able to gain all sorts of good benefits out of it, including making your patients more supportive of you. Okay, so this is kind of getting to the end here, but it's really important. You need to understand what your own risk tolerance is. And you need to really be very realistic about that. I just told you all a story about Colorado and in Denver, where we had this horrible bloodbath where 3/4 of the dispensaries in the city ended up getting wiped out over a 2-year period. And millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars of investment capital got wiped out at the same time. The folks who ended up suffering were people who assumed a best case scenario. Never assume a best case scenario when you're doing risk analysis, especially not with a product that's illegal under federal law, that's barely legal under state law, that's mostly unregulated, okay? It's just not appropriate. Be real. Understand what the worst case scenario is and how it can affect you. I'll just give you another example. Harborside, one of the reasons that Harborside has been so successful is that we have above 50% of our top level managers are women. Most of them are moms. I always say, if you want to get something done, ask a mom to do it. I've been trying to get these amazing and strong women to come out and do some of what I do, to be more of the face of Harborside, because they're incredibly compelling. In many cases, they're better ambassadors than I could possibly be. Just last week, 2 superstars in our staff were invited to be profiled by a national news agency. And both of them declined. Why? Well, because they're moms. They have kids who are under 18 years old. And in California, we still don't have statewide regulation of cannabis. In some parts of California, Child Protective Services is still coming and seizing children from medical cannabis patients. And so they properly used a worst case scenario risk analysis and decided to turn down that opportunity, which would have been a great opportunity for their career and a great opportunity for Harborside. And it's very disappointing to me that they were unable to take advantage of that, but I had to support them. What other choice can you make? So be real. Be real about the risks. Be real about what your level of tolerance is as you're going into this. There is a lot of money to be made. Beyond that, there's a lot of good to be done for a lot of people, but there are some risks. If you pay attention to them, if you pay attention to all of these other tips that I've been talking to you about, if most of all, you take the lessons that this plant teaches you seriously, we stay true to our better selves, we will get to that day that I was talking about. And I hope that I'll be able to get together with all of you in another 10 or 20 or 30 years. We'll be sitting around, we'll be counting our treasure, and that treasure is going to include being able to say that we left this world a little bit better than we found it. Thanks so much.